Happy Tuesday, everyone. Normally I'm broadcasting on Mondays. No, it's Wednesday. I'm all mixed up. Welcome, everyone, to this very impromptu and spontaneous live stream because I got in hair and makeup for something that went on to be rescheduled. Why miss a perfectly good opportunity when I'm already in hair and makeup to have a live stream? Especially since I've been off for a few weeks. As many of you know, I've been working on my dissertation. Don't be overly impressed. I'm only getting a doctor of ministry. I'm not getting a PhD. So I am working hard, though, and trying to make progress on my dissertation. I've got certain incremental goals set. And so this month is really a big month of trying to knock out the first 50 pages by July the 1st. So that's why there haven't been any podcasts of late. And since I'm in hair and makeup, my husband had suggested to me a few weeks ago, like, well, one way you could keep the podcast going, just not write anything and just do sort of spontaneous, unscripted things. And I thought, yeah, I could, but still requires a level of planning. I don't know if I have the bandwidth for that. But since I'm already in hair and makeup and there were a couple of things that were on my mind, I thought, what the heck? We already have the lights on. Bob's already here. So let's go live. So please do let me know if you are watching. Otherwise, I'll just talk into the camera. That's okay too. But I do have a couple of things that I want to talk about. And hey, Susanna, glad you're here. And Deborah, I don't recognize your name, so welcome. And I do want to thank everyone who subscribed to the channel recently. I was trying to meet my goal of getting to 10,000 subscribers when I last dropped the last podcast, and I made it. I made to my goal of 10,000. I'm actually almost at 11,000, largely thanks to the power of Mike Winger and Melissa Doherty, who both shared my goal on their social media. Big thank you to them. And I'm actually almost at 11,000. So super huge thank you. It took me 10 years to get to the first 1,000, I think. I looked it up. I set up this channel originally in 2009. So it's been a minute. I've been grinding it out for quite a while here in a small corner of the internet. But I do want to thank you for those of you who subscribed. If you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscription bell or the notification bell so that you can be notified whenever I upload new content, which normally is at least once a week, except for right now when I'm trying to work on my dissertation. Okay, so let's talk about Biola. We haven't talked about Biola in a while. It's been over a year. I am not going to re-rehearse, all of the details of my journey on this issue of looking into what's happening in Christian higher ed. I started commenting on these things publicly back in 2020 and have done a few podcasts related to the critical social theories coming into Christian higher ed. You can go check out that playlist on my channel. Last April, I believe, I did kind of a capstone update to all of the research that I had done, and you can check that out. But I originally got interested in looking into what was happening in Christian higher ed with regard to things like critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion because of our family's kind of brush with those issues at Biola in particular, because my husband and I both graduated from Biola University. I'm a 3-time graduate of Biola, once from the undergrad program and twice in seminary. And we sent our oldest daughter to Biola. My husband's parents went to Biola. So we are a 3-generation Biola family. It is an institution that I love. And I began commenting on it because I love it and was really hoping I could make a difference on the issue and some of the concerns that I had related to the school, and really wanted to try to do some good to help them turn around and preserve the legacy of what I consider to be an important historically Christian institution. However, I've not been effective in being able to bring about much change. And again, you can watch some of my previous streams and updates on social media about that. But about a week ago, I got a memo that was sent out to all of the staff and faculty at Biola about some developments in their diversity, their DEI office. And I want to start off by saying that I don't have a personal issue with people themselves that Biola has hired to implement these processes and policies. They were doing the things that they were hired to do. My issue is at the leadership level. It's at the board level. It's at the presidential level. It's at the provost level. These are the people that have the power and position to be able to hire and fire people. My issue is not with people who were doing the things that they were hired to do. Okay. So I don't want you to go dox anyone. I don't want you to harass anyone. This isn't about people per se who are just doing their jobs. Okay. So, I want to talk us through this memo. So, Bob's got it on this, in the queue here. We could start with the social media post that I made last week. It says a memo from Biola's president was just sent out to the staff and faculty. And this is kind of the bottom line, yada, yada, yada. As a result of this decision, effective July 1st, the Division of Diversity and Inclusion will be closed. Hopefully, this is the first step toward the school making a public, and I put the word public in all caps, statement of lament and repent for taking the university down this path, shaming parents and donors who tried to raise concerns, and the students who have been injured by this ideology. The reason that these changes are effective July 1st is because Biola's fiscal year starts on July 1st. And so that's why that date was selected. I'm almost positive of that. And they're also on summer break, so, it's a good time to transition. So here's the thing that I noticed, and this is all just kind of spontaneous. I don't have anything written out, but we're going to go through the document. And we're going to look at some interaction I've had on social media. But about a year ago, maybe less, I went on the Biola website and in their diversity office page. And what I noticed is that their team had been dramatically pared down. In the past, what I had said was that they had 5 or 6 full-time people under the banner of diversity. It could be more. I felt like that was a modest number. And, just as a back of the envelope calculation, I had said multiple times in public, they're probably in it for $500,000 at least, just in salaries, workers' comp, taxes, and all of that, benefits. And so their financial commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion was substantial. A few years ago, they had a big online live stream event where they rolled out their strategic plan on diversity. And I think that event was maybe an hour, 2 hours. I don't know if it's still on the Biola YouTube channel, but it was for a while. And they rolled out a whole new section of the website, and it had definitions and all this kind of stuff. What it didn't have a lot of were specifics. It had a lot of the typical diversity language with a little bit of Jesus and loving your neighbor sprinkled on the top. But it didn't have a lot of specifics about how are we going to implement this. In one post Biola made was across all curricula, all courses. They wanted to implement this ethos. And again, I've documented all of that in the past, but they wanted to really build into the ethos, the culture, in the structures and the systems, to borrow the DEI type of language, from the top down, an ethos built on some Christianized version of diversity, equity, and inclusion. For a good book that kind of comes at this Christian DEI perspective would be Christina Edmondson's book, Faithful Anti-Racism. She is an anti-racist advocate and wants to put forward a framework of what she considers to be Christian anti-racism, Christian DEI. You can also look on the Christian Coalition of Colleges and Universities, the CCCU website. They have a whole page about diversity, and you'll notice that some of the resources that they recommend are like Ibrahim X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo and things that are in that, what we historically have called the canon, the authoritative voices on DEI issues. And Biola seemed like totally bought in, like they were all in on these issues. And there were more than a few concerned parents, donors, alumni who want to send their children one day to Biola, and they're like, hey, wait a minute. Like, what are we doing here? What is this? But what we have to understand is that Biola didn't just develop this in reaction to events from 2020. They had this office in place years before that. And it was pretty healthily staffed. So again, I noticed about a year ago, maybe a little less, that they had really pared down that staff. Like on the website, I think the official diversity and inclusion office was down to 2 people. And they have another program called the SEED program, which is kind of hooked to a scholarship and first gen program that fell under the umbrella of the diversity and inclusion direction and leadership. And they still had a couple of people in that office, but they had made some changes as of 2023, which I'm going to be honest, surprised me. Because like I said, back in, I believe it was 2021 was when they had that big event and they rolled out all of the strategic plan for DEI at the university and trying to cloak that as love your neighbor and a biblical thing. And so when I went on there, I don't know, maybe 8, 9, 10 months ago or so, and I saw how the staffing had been pared down, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Because there were many people like myself who I had written letters of concern to the president directly in 2020. In the very beginning, I was so naive. I thought this is just a mistake. It's a miscommunication. It's misunderstanding. They don't really know what they're doing. But after multiple conversations with deans, department heads, staff people, people in, let's say, the highest levels of authority, because I'm not allowed to talk about it because they swore us to confidentiality in these meetings. So I can't tell you in particular who they were that we met with, but the highest levels knew exactly what they were doing. This was all quite intentional. I published linked to the dissertation from the former provost. I read the dissertation and then I linked to it. And it was basically how to bring DEI types of ideas, critical theory ideas, into the realm of Christian higher ed. That's what the dissertation, the gist of it was about that. And so I was concerned as an alumni who was sending my kid there at that time. And I expressed these concerns directly to the appropriate people on multiple occasions and was told quite directly that Biola was not going to change course and that they were not going to set up a study committee to look into it or develop a position statement related to the critical social theories, and that they were comfortable with a wide range of faculty, anyone from very historic and conservative, someone like Thaddeus Williams, a friend of the ministry, all the way, down to people that were very, very progressive. Okay, we'll just put it that way. And they had a wide spectrum of people who had a Christian testimony and named the name of Christ that they had hired. And that at that time, this was probably about 2021 at that point, that was the direction that they were going. And at that time that they didn't really have a plan to change their minds about it. Well, I knew that about 8 or 9 months ago, something had changed, because that department, the diversity and inclusion department, was quite pared down. And so I thought, this is interesting. I'm wondering if they've had enough complaints now, because when I was really in this stream 3 years ago, there were parents who were reaching out to me, say like, hey, I complained, but I got this generic letter back. And then I looked at the letter I received back, and it was, oh, look, it's a near duplicate. And so it seemed like they had kind of a system for how to deal with people like me who were complaining or writing in about their concerns. But something happened. One of the things that happens was there was a change of provost, and they brought in a new provost. The other provost, I believe, retired or something, or moved on, or I don't remember the official narrative. And so they brought in a new provost, and I don't know if it's a coincidence. I don't know, because Biola isn't very transparent about these things. But it's interesting that as the new provost has come in, the diversity department is shrinking. Are those related events? I don't know. But last week, the president's office releases a memo with some updates. And someone's asking on YouTube, would I recommend Biola for graduate studies? Interestingly, last year they closed their School of Intercultural Studies, which I would say, and I have a friend of the ministry who got his PhD through the Cook International School of Intercultural Studies. It was kind of a bastion for progressives. There's a lot of progressive voices over there. Again, I don't know why things happen. Just noticing. New provost comes on, the intercultural school of graduate school goes away. Related events? I don't know. But there have been shifts. There have been some people who I would characterize as being more progressive who have left. Not all of them. But there have been some changes. Would I recommend it for graduate studies today? I don't know. I think that I have mixed feelings about recommending any school, because people make major life decisions based on recommendations, and I don't really want to be responsible for that. What I would say is do your homework about the particular program that you're looking into. Look at the professors who are there and ask a lot of questions. And that would be my best advice for that. Really, the only seminary that I'm recommending at this point is Southern Evangelical Seminary, SES, that is back east. That's really the only one that I feel totally comfortable and confident in recommending at this point publicly. Okay, so let's get into this statement from the president of Biola University. And again, this was sent out last week to staff and faculty. And it starts out with, after 20 years of a centralized diversity division at Biola beginning in the fall of 2024, we will be strengthening. Oh, there we go. We will be strengthening our biblical mission toward unity by establishing a Unity in Diversity Advisory Council, which I will chair and appoint a faculty member to co-chair with me. I find this so interesting. And here's why. First of all, I don't think most donors and alumni were aware that Biola has been doing this kind of diversity thing for a long time. Now, we could debate this number of 20 years. Monique would have more information on that because she was there during that time and she was involved with those people. And she could rehearse like the complete history of all of that. I don't know where the president is getting this number of 20 years or when he's starting counting, but either which way, I do find it interesting that he's kind of revealing that there has been a centralized effort at the university for 2 decades on diversity. And I think that number would probably catch a lot of alumni and donors off guard. I think that many of them were under the impression that this is something that maybe just happened 4 or 5 years ago. All right, let's continue. I also think that it's interesting that he's trying to get away, it seems. Again, I don't know. I don't pretend to know his motivations. But the wording here is very interesting to me, that they're moving toward unity as being the lead rather than diversity. And this unity in diversity language comes from a statement that Biola came out with a few years ago, and you can go on their website and see it. It's a unity and diversity statement, and it's trying to be a theological underpinning for DEI. Now, I've raised questions about this statement. I don't think it works. I think it's way too vague and general and unspecific. But I do find it interesting that they are going toward unity first rather than diversity first, which has been a point that Monique and I have brought up on many, many occasions, is for Christians, we need to start with a conversation about unity first. And this was a point of our conversations with many of the people who were in places of power 3 and 4 years ago. When we were having all those conversations with them, we were trying to hit the issue of unity first rather than diversity first. Kind of seems like they're coming around our way of thinking. All right. He's going to set up this advisory council. Now, here's a theory. I'm not telling you this is what's going to happen, but the wheels of change in Christian higher ed are slow to turn. I have a theory about this advisory council. And I've talked to at least one person at Biola who is on the inside, and they agreed with me on this theory, is that advisory councils have a tendency to silently go away. Like, it might meet a few times and then somebody stops calling those meetings. I have a feeling, and again, this is just a theory. It's my hunch. It's not a word from the Lord. It's not, in any way saying I have inside information is that this is what is going to happen. This is my own opinion, thought, and theory. I wonder if this whole, we're going to set up an advisory council thing is something that might meet a few times, and then it just might silently go away. The meetings will stop being called, or they're just going to give advice. It's an advisory council. The president's office can listen to it or not. Who knows? Just a theory. Okay, let's continue. After careful consideration of our current financial circumstances, okay, so here's the motivation, or at least what they're stating publicly. The motivation is we are moving from a centralized model of diversity and inclusion division that directs Biola's diversity efforts into a decentralized university-wide council who will advise the cabinet and me on diversity issues. This shift aims to ensure that we are good stewards of our resources while maintaining a robust commitment to continually fostering a biblical approach to diversity and inclusion across our institution. Okay, so here's my translation of this. This is my theory of what's happening here. They want to signal to the people who care about diversity and inclusion, hey, we're not abandoning diversity and inclusion altogether. We're just in a bit of a financial crunch. We need to eliminate some positions. So we're not going to have designated persons that are going to be doing this. Rather, what we're going to do is have faculty members across the university that we're going to select, because part of working in Christian higher ed is you're not just there to teach classes, you got to serve on committees. And that's just part of it. So we're going to select a committee of people that we're already paying. They're already tenured. They're already on the payroll. Assistant professors, associate professors. We're going to put this team of people together that we're already paying, and we're going to get rid of the people that we have been paying like designated salaries to. So they're signaling to people, hey, we're still going to preserve diversity and inclusion. We're just going to do it this other kind of way because we're having financial issues. But also they want to signal to donors and alumni that we're committed to a biblical approach. So they're doing a lot of, there's a lot happening in this paragraph. And they really want to know, they want to send different messages to different people. Again, this is just my opinion about it. Okay, the council's purpose will be simple: to nurture and resource our community made up of thousands of unique members to live into our theological statement, diversity or unity amidst diversity. And again, this is that statement I was alluding to earlier. You can go on the Biola website and look for that. And if you're interested in these issues, I could do a whole live stream about just breaking that down. But they're referring you to that. So that increasingly Biola is known for a spirit of reconciliation and belonging. They will provide counsel to me and other university leaders on ways in which we might more intentionally live into our unity amidst diversity statement. Okay, let me kind of translate what I think is happening here in this paragraph. They want to signal to people who are sympathetic to DEI, hey, we're kind of changing the words here. We're going to talk, instead of we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we're going to talk about reconciliation and belonging. Now, for those of you who are in the DEI stream, you already know that DEI is changing a lot of its terms, and the word belonging, some departments are now DEIB for belonging. And this is like the new big buzzword for DEI. Sometimes offices are now being changed from DEI offices to belonging and accessibility offices, or belonging and anti-racism offices. And so the public kind of knows now, like, what is DEI exactly? Is it really good? Is it really helping us? Is it a scam? Some people want to know that. And so some of the nomenclature is changing, okay? So I find it so interesting that they're using these words instead of diversity and inclusion. They kind of seem like they maybe want to shift the narrative to reconciliation and belonging. Next sentence, though, is that they want to live out their statement on unity amidst diversity because that's their theological kind of biblical foundation. If we could go to the next slide. There you go. They want to live into, that statement at every level so that we may become even more reflexive of our gospel-centered unity. So see here, what they're doing is they want to remind those of us who are concerned about DEI and maybe even concerned about these new terms like reconciliation and belonging. We're leaning into gospel-centered unity. So they're really trying to, I think, allegedly, my opinion, this is very political. They're trying to assure both sides of the conversation that there's a presence for their viewpoint in what Biola is doing. Okay. As a result of this decision, effective July 1st, the Division of Diversity and Inclusion will be closed. This means that 2 positions, the Chief Diversity Officer and Executive Assistant Program Coordinator, which were the 2 people that I noticed on the website about 8 months ago that had been pared down just to them, are being eliminated. The entire seed staff, which again is Biola's kind of first gen scholarship program and affinity groups and more, including the director and the assistant director for the seed program, will move under the Division of Student Development and continue the important work provided to our students. This decision will not impact any of the student programs, first gen scholars, which is from what I understand, it's a scholarship program for first generation students. First generation students is a code word for, okay, I want to be careful how I say this because it's not just for minority students. I know someone who is a white person who benefited from the first gen scholarship. It is for people, they are the first generation in their family to go to college, but this tends to be more heavily impacting of racial minorities to help them make a pathway, because the assumption is that students from minority families can't afford a school like Biola. And so they need this extra scholarship. And so there's a first gen dorm, there's a first gen kind of fellowshipping and all of that. So that's what that program is about. Lead scholars and affinity groups currently offered under the Division of Diversity and Inclusion. So basically the SEED program is being shuttled to a different department. So it's still, they're assuring, again, what's happening here is that they're assuring the people that are sympathetic to this program, hey, this program isn't going away. Don't worry. Your scholarship's not going away. We're still going to have the affinity groups, which affinity groups are fellowship groups based on race and gender. So you might have the Asian women's group or the Black men's group, the Black women's group. Interestingly, there is a white affinity group. It's called the commune or the commune, which kind of sounds like that other word where I don't know what white students do in the white affinity group. It kind of sounds like they sit around and talk about their privilege. Just throwing that out there. So then they go on in the next paragraph. We are so grateful for the work of the people in this department and their efforts over the last 12 years. So that signals again to donors and alumni, hey, these are programs that have been around a while. We've had people in these positions. Now the number is for at least 12 years. One particular person has been there since 2017. So what we have to understand is that Biola has been fairly financially invested in these programs and in this ideology. So this is to me very interesting in what they're saying. All right. Is there anything else here? Let's skip to the last slide, the third slide toward the end of the letter. Please join me in expressing our gratitude to these people and their team, their unwavering dedication and commitment to the important work of, here's what we want to signal to donors and alumni, Christ-centered diversity, okay? That this will help leave a legacy which will continue to inspire us in the days and years ahead. Okay. So is this good news? Are they just kind of moving people around, but nothing's really changing? That was kind of the gist of a lot of comments. This got a lot of comments, both on my feed at Center for Biblical Unity, and it got a lot of action over at or my feed at Theology Mom and over at the Center for Biblical Unity. I shared it both places. Now, some people saw it as, hey, this is good news. They're dissolving the Department of Diversity. They're getting rid of the diversity officer. They're kind of putting her on a temporary quasi sabbatical, but it kind of sounds to me like it's going to be phased out. The office is officially closing. Who knows what's going to happen to that position? I'm kind of reading into it that it'll be phased out over time. I could be wrong about that. But some people took this as good news. Yay! This is a win. You know, we're shutting down the office with this ideology. Other people took it as my friend Laura says on YouTube, so really nothing is changing in practice. And she's not alone in that sentiment of what's really happening here? Is this really good news? Is this more of the same? We're just shuffling people around. Wanderer says, so it feels like they don't want to take a stand to create waves, so they are going to ride the fence. Yeah. Kelly says they lost donors, including me. They lost a lot of donors, and I've heard from some of them. And people just felt like they tried to express their concerns 3 and 4 years ago. And they were given kind of cut and paste answers. And it wasn't satisfying. Now, we can look at this in a couple of ways. We could look at it, and I think the kind of the cynical reading of what's happening here is this is not a real change. They're just shuffling people around. Sure, they're feigning change because they're closing this office, but is it really change? Okay, so that's, to me, you know, I think that's a legitimate possible interpretation of what's happening. I think for me, I'm a little bit optimistic, and here's why. They already cut staff a year, like 8 or 9 months ago. I think last fiscal year. They cut staff. They didn't rehire those people. That could be good. They closed the School of Intercultural Studies. I think that could be seen as some progress. They have a new provost. Now, I feel kind of mixed about the provost, if I'm honest. He wrote a great article back in, I think it was the fall of 2022. You can look up as Matthew J. Hall. And it was a very strong anti-critical race theory piece. I think I may have even reposted it before I really knew who he was. So we could see that in a positive. I like a strong stand. I like clarity. But on the other hand, there's a very famous viral clip of the current Biola provost who used to be at, I think, it's either at Southern Baptist Seminary or Southwestern Baptist Seminary, one of them, where he was some higher up. I don't know if he was the provost, but he was really high there. I think he was the VP or something. And there's a famous viral clip of him saying, "I'm white, so I'll always be a racist. I'll never be able to not be a racist because I'm white." Now, I actually did the hard work one day of finding the original whole conversation from that viral clip. And I watched the whole thing in context because I thought, well, maybe, you know how clips are. Maybe it's not fair. No. It really sounds like he was kind of buying into the whole critical race theory, white privilege, Robin DiAngelo thing. Now, that interview, if I remember correctly, was from 2018 or 2019. his article against critical race theory, I think, was the fall of 22 or 21. And what troubles me is that I can't find a statement where he says, I used to believe this, but I used to believe in kind of the whiteness, Robin DiAngelo, white privilege thing, but I've evolved and now I believe this way. Now, if I could find that, if you know where that is, send it to me. But all I can find is he said this thing in 2018, 2019, and then he said this thing in 21 or 22. It's a little strange. But it kind of reminds me of what Biola is doing. And it feels like the lack of transparency is really what I have a problem with. And I want to go back to my original post here, the last paragraph, as I said, hopefully, best case scenario, this is the first step toward the school making a public statement of lament and repent for taking the university down this path in the first place. Shaming parents and donors who tried to raise concerns and the students who have been injured by this ideology. This is, to me, what I'm really hoping for. I would love to see transparency and informed consent when it comes to choosing a Christian college. Now, I'm using Biola as an example because it's the one that I'm the most familiar with. Like I said at the top of the show, it's the one that I care about. I love it. We're a 3-generation Biola family. I've been fighting this fight and speaking out publicly for 3 or 4 years now because I love Biola. Okay? But I don't want to be delusional in my thinking about it because there has been drift and we need to be honest about that. And what I would really love and would, Biola, if you will have a public statement to that effect, we made a mistake. We went down this path. We were wrong. We've injured people. I'll have you on my show tomorrow. I'll promote you. But I can't do that as long as there isn't transparency about what's happening. If there is a change of heart, a change of ideology, a change of, oh my word, we really messed up. We drifted. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's have a public conversation. When I think of somebody like Rosaria Butterfield and the evolution that she's had in her own journey of going from, kind of being on the more of the side B conversation of how to think about and talk to people who are struggling with homosexuality to her current position, she's been very transparent about that evolution and saying, I was wrong. I changed my mind. I repent. She's open to having that conversation. I think that's what I'm kind of looking for from these Christian colleges. I'm looking for transparency. I'm looking for an honest conversation. These Christian colleges, so many of them were quick to have live streams back in 2020 of lament and repent. When BLM was rioting and all of that. And then they doubled down on their DEI policies. But where are we now? And why is this happening? See, we don't really know the why. The public version is financial issues. Okay, if that's true, if that's 100% of the story, financial issues. Okay, financial issues. Great. But that doesn't tell me you've changed your mind or that how you're going to undo some of the systems and structures that you've built into university life. Dissolving this office doesn't mean that we're not going to have these trainings anymore. And there are trainings at Biola to talk to white faculty about their whiteness. I don't hear them repenting of the whole ideology. Do they want me to read that into it? What they're doing here? Maybe. I don't know. I have a lot of questions, but I've had a lot of questions for 4 years and not a lot of answers. So yeah. So let's see. Yeah. So going back to the comment, if it doesn't feel like they're taking a stand, I agree. It doesn't really feel like a stand. I don't know what this is. I have a lot of questions. But what I'd really like to see is a change. Somebody in leadership, a board member, the president, the provost, somebody go public and say, we were wrong. This is what we're doing now. I don't know if we'll ever see that, but that's my thoughts about it. All right, real quick before we go out. Oh, I said Matthew Hall. Yeah. Is who I was talking about earlier. Yeah.
We got comments from Facebook.
Oh, Facebook comments. Okay. Oh, Japan. Wow. The only difference, Kristen, the only difference between a DMin and a PhD is yours is pragmatic. That's true. There's a lot more ministry focus. The amount of work for any doctorate is massive. Ask me, I know. Yeah. Kristen was my guest on the show last April when I did kind of what I mentioned earlier of a little bit of a capstone of all of the research that I've done about Christian higher ed. My friend Chris says, is this a reaction to a real go woke, go broke reaction from donors, enrollment? I don't know 100%. All I can tell you, Chris, is I've interacted with a fair number of donors who are no longer donating to Biola. And I'm sure that's probably true at other places of Christian higher ed. Again, I'm only using Biola as a microcosm of what I think is the more endemic problem in Christian higher ed. Because that's what I'm familiar with. I think that their enrollment went down for a while, but that could be due to the pandemic. And their enrollment is climbing back up. So hard to say. I really don't have enough receipts to comment on that. Drew says, my fear is that this is only a stalling tactic for the progressives as they seek to entrench themselves in other areas of the school. I think that's a real possibility. And that's why I'm calling for and hoping for a public statement. Is this a change in ideology? We don't know that. Now they want to signal to us gospel-centered unity and unity first. They want to signal to those of us who are more conservative and the historic Christian camp, hey, we're about it. We're about gospel unity. But they're also sending some other signals to people who are more sympathetic to DEI issues. Okay. I think, that's it? All right, great. All right, one more thing as we wrap up here. I want to make a couple comments about my own journey on the issue of Christian nationalism. What a journey it's been. So a couple of years ago, maybe about a year and a half, 2 years ago, started noticing certain tweets and started hearing all this conversation about Christian nationalism. We've done a couple shows on Christian nationalism. We had Neil on to talk about it last season. We had Sam Say on earlier this season. No, that was at the end of last season to talk about it on all the things. And, okay, yeah. So the big question I've had is I've never even really seen this term before, Christian nationalism. When I started seeing it on Twitter, I didn't really know what it was. Like, what are we talking about? What is the definition of it? When we had Sam Say on, we talked about 3 or 4 different definitions because it really depends on who you're talking to and what it is. And some people are acting like this is almost an essential of the faith. Like you have to hold to Christian nationalism or you're not a real Christian. You're just weak sauce, in your theology. And I'm thinking, I've been in theology for 30 years. I've never heard of this term before. So if it's going to be an essential of the faith, I got to learn more about it. So some people would define Christian nationalism as pretty much any Christian who votes more conservatively. Oh, you're a Christian nationalist. That tends to be how people on the left defined it, or progressives. And other people have a very technical definition of it, and those people tend to be more post-millennial in their eschatology. They see that our participation in bringing the kingdom of God to earth is vital, and they tend to be theonomists who want to enact laws of the Old Testament into public policy and law. And then there's different kinds of theonomists, which I won't go into, but it's a very technical discussion. And so I started asking around to some of my friends and saying, hey, are you hearing about this? What are you hearing? Most of the people I talked to weren't even really paying attention to it. And I felt like I was back in 2018 again, when Monique and I first started the conversation about critical race theory. And I asked my other friends in apologetics, and I said, hey, have you ever heard of this? And what do you think about it? And they're like, oh, that's nothing. I've never heard of it. That's not a concern. And the more Monique and I talked, the more I thought, no, I think this is a big concern. I think this is something that could be a real challenge to the Christian faith. And then 2020 happened, and here we are. I kind of feel like that in a way about the Christian nationalism conversation, in that there's a lot of things happening. And even if you're not seeing it all because you're not on social media that much, what's happening on Twitter with prominent voices and followers of theirs, there's a lot of discussion as to what is Christian nationalism, how do we define it, should we participate in it, and which version of Christian nationalism should we listen to. So I've been doing a lot of reading for the last couple years, even part of my doctoral program. It's one of the main reasons why I started my doctoral program, because I knew that I needed to understand more about this. So if you're feeling confused, I want to let you know that I've been feeling confused. And it's not because you're just uneducated or a dumb person. This is a very complex topic that is ramping up very quickly. It causes a lot of emotions. And I want to tell you that there needs to be more public conversation on this, because it is kind of new, and we need an opportunity to have those conversations in public. This is why people write books. This is why people write articles. And this is why they have back and forth. And that is part of the process as we all try to sharpen each other. Now, I've read on the more theonomic side of Christian nationalism. I read Doug Wilson's book, Mere Christendom. Monique read Stephen Wolfe's book on Christian nationalism. I've listened to a lot of content by different people in different streams of Christian nationalism. And I'm really trying to understand what it is. But I don't think it's useful or helpful for me to have a bunch of technical conversations in public about it until I really get a grip on it. And that's what I've been trying to do. Now, I have had some conversations about politics on my channel, and I've talked about the things that I feel like my conscience is pretty comfortable with. Like, this seems like a solid Christian position. I think this is helpful. I did a series on justice. I did another series on Is America Under God's Judgment? I did a podcast on like 3 things that Christians should know about politics. So there are some things that in my journey, I've been feeling like, okay, I think I can say this much publicly, but there are things that I have left out. And as I've said before, like, I think I deserve an opportunity to have my own process about these things. But I just want to encourage you, like some things that happen in culture, it's hard. It's hard to understand. These things are complicated and it takes time. And it's okay if you feel like I'm hearing this word and I don't know what it really means. And I'm struggling to know who to listen to. And things have become so destabilized, I think, since 2020 in particular. It's hard for many of us to know, who do I trust? Who are the trusted voices? Who do I listen to? Who has sound doctrine? I see those kinds of posts a lot on social media in the groups that I'm in. And it's difficult. And if you're struggling, it's okay. I'm struggling too. I'm in my own process. I'm learning and trying to grow and trying to see all sides and trying to weigh arguments biblically and having time to go back to look at scripture. And so don't feel like if you're exhausted, that's probably normal. Like 2020 was exhausting. We went through a time when everybody was trying to get up to speed on issues related to race and equality and equity and diversity. And what do I make of all of these terms? And it was a lot. And then right on the heels of that, now we're having to get really clear on political philosophy, Christian nationalism. It's a lot. It's exhausting. I'm tired. I get sick of it. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're struggling to understand these things, it's okay. I'm not saying don't inform yourself. I'm not saying, opt out, because I do think these are important issues. And I think they're going to grow increasingly important as the years go by. But also keep in mind that the people that it's hard, even for those of us who, I don't want to call myself a professional, but those of us who are trying to watch content full time and really try to study and understand things, like some of us are struggling too. And so I don't know, hopefully that's an encouragement to you. Kelly says the first time she ever heard the term Christian nationalism was Russell Moore, who is the editor for Christianity Today, former president at the ERLC, which is the Southern Baptist Policy Advocacy entity. He used to describe people who voted for Trump as Christian nationalists. Yes, and that would be kind of the definition that I was mentioning earlier of pretty much, if you want to talk about the Christian worldview as some connection to politics, you can be called a Christian nationalist. But there are definitely competing definitions of the word right now out there in the public space and in what's called public theology. So it's a lot. I know it's a lot. I don't know. That's my word of encouragement to you. Hang in there and just know that this is a project that Monique and I are actively engaged in, trying to understand. And, we deserve to have our own learning curve in all of this. Okay. Facebook. Lance Wall now talks about leaders in El Salvador and other nations that are upholding biblical values, hungry, etc. Yeah, and that's another version of Christian nationalism. And there's a stream that wants to invest a lot of power in one person to clean up the depravity. And I think the El Salvadorian president, or I don't know what his official term is, leader there, would be in a modern example of that. That is definitely one stream within the Christian nationalism conversation, is what's the best pathway to clean up the paganism and the mess, and what's the alternative to living in drag queen culture, and has the Constitution actually contributed to the problem? Religious pluralism. Is there a case for religious pluralism, or has religious pluralism been a social experiment that we now see has failed and is part of the problem? These are very big questions that are being discussed and need to be explored. There needs to be more public conversation. But I think that what's unhelpful is when people jump in the public conversation and like, well, if you don't affirm my version of Christian nationalism, then you're not a real Christian, you're apostate, you're a compromiser. It's like, wait a minute. Hold on. This is a conversation worth having. We can do this, but we have to understand like differentiating the main things and the secondary things and how to be civil with one another. This is fairly new. Like, let's be a little circumspect about it and be patient with one another as we try to persuade one another to particular positions. I'm all for the conversation. I'm all for the persuasion. What I'm not for is bullying. And people who want to bully me, I'm like, I'm not going to interact with you because you don't sound like you're about education. You just sound like you're about winning. It's not useful. All right. Wanderer says, I feel like I am good with where I stand as far as politics coming out of the NAR, but others are not okay with me trying to be balanced. It is difficult. Yeah, and the NAR version of Christian nationalism is kind of another stream of the conversation, the whole 7 Mountain Mandate and all of that. That's another version of Christian nationalism that is in the competition of ideas. So we need to have patience with one another. We need to have patience with ourselves. Let's try to persuade each other. Let's try to have public conversations, but let's try to keep it civil and respectful and doing things in a biblical manner. All right, my friends, thanks for listening to this spontaneous ramble. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you again sometime. The podcast will resume in earnest, probably in about mid to late July. I've got some great content planned for you guys, and I'm looking forward to bringing it to you. Finishing out the series on evangelism. I've got some interviews lined up. I think you're going to find it useful and helpful and encouraging in your faith. With that, thank you so much for watching. Have a good week. God bless.